But we're very excited today because we have our great friend Amy Cohen with us today to share with us. So this is all a part of the Desert Lecture Collaborative series. We're paired up with High Desert Nature Museum, Coachella Valley History Museum, Morongo Valley Historical Society, and La Quinta Historical Society. And I'm Charlotte Fox, the director of the La Quinta Museum. If you haven't seen yet, we have a wonderful exhibit online called Tattooed and Tenacious, which that leads us into what our lecture is about today. We've got Amy Cohen. She is the executive director of Exhibit Envoy, which is a wonderful nonprofit that creates and travels exhibits to small museums like ours. They help us bring wonderful content to you. And she is the curator of the Tattooed and Tenacious exhibit. It has been shown in 12 institutions around California already, and she's going to share with us about that today. So let me turn some time over here to Amy Cohen. Let's all welcome her. Welcome, Amy.
Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today on, well, what's up here in Oakland, a very rainy, cloudy day. I hope much nicer down near where you are. But I'm really excited to be here and to get to talk about women in tattoos today. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. And we'll get started. All right, can folks see the slides? I see yes, thumbs up, perfect. Okay, great. So thanks again, Charla, and thanks again for all of the different museums that are taking part in this lecture series for having me here today. Like Charla said, my name is Amy Cohen. I'm the director of Exhibit Envoy, which travels this exhibit. But prior to becoming director of this nonprofit, I was in grad school. I was getting my degree in museum studies, and one of the requirements, of course, was to complete a thesis. I don't know about you, but I know that a lot of folks who have completed one write it, put it on the shelf, and it's never looked at again. I did that in undergrad as well, and I thought, I'm ready for something different. I want something people are going to see and hopefully appreciate, even if it's just for 3 months during one installation. So I started thinking to myself, you know, what could I do that would engage folks? And so, of course, as someone who has tattoos, something that I've thought about just in the course of getting them is, when did women start getting tattoos? Who were these women who were tattooing other women or tattooing men? What did that process look like? What's the early history of this? And this is how this installation was born. I started working with folks at the Hayward Area Historical Society to kind of develop this idea a little bit further, because, you know, if you think of tattoos, and then even women in tattoos, and then women in tattoos in California, that's still a huge story, especially if you look at modern day. So I narrowed it even further down. So a lot of our talk today is going to be looking at women in tattoos before World War II, which I think is going to be very exciting. So you can see me standing here right now. Well, right now, you know what I mean. Standing here in the first installation in Hayward, and then the sign right next to me. I do want to make sure I start this talk off by giving credit to the folks who really helped me out with this. Adrienne McGraw and Susan Sparrow at JFK University, the folks at the Hayward Area Historical Society, and some tattoo artists as well. So I was really lucky to get to talk to some folks who are pretty well known in the tattoo world. Lyle Tuttle and I had a lot of sit downs. He invited me over to his house in Ukiah, and we had vodka at noon as we talked about ladies in tattoos. He came to the opening in Hayward, lent a lot of objects for the show, and opened up his archives to me. And I was really happy to be able to work with Lyle on this in 2015. I talked to Madame Chinchilla, who's up in Fort Bragg. She runs the Triangle Tattoo Museum, and she's one of the early female tattoo artists who's still working and in the game. So I was just really lucky to be able to talk to a lot of folks who've kind of experienced a lot of this history, and then they were able to pass on some of this knowledge to me. So I want to start out by talking about the first female tattoo artists in California, which of course are Native women. Almost every tribe in California had a tattooing tradition. And it was really female elders that often held that knowledge. And there were different reasons that women would get tattooed, Native women would get tattooed. It could be part of a puberty ritual. It could be to pass on to or to recognize each other in the afterlife, or it could even be just for purely aesthetic reasons, to make your face look different or look broader, which was considered beautiful in some tribes. And almost every tribe had a tattooing tradition that had to do with chin tattoos. That's not the only thing. There were definitely traditions having to do with body tattooing, tattooing arms, but you can see from this chart just some of the different examples of chin tattoos that were in practice. Unfortunately, this practice was almost entirely wiped out. It was a concerted effort by the US government to assimilate Native peoples, but it's really exciting to see that a lot of modern day Native women have revived the practice. If you look at the online exhibit, there are 2 women, modern day Native women who've revived that practice. You can see a lot of folks just around California, and then also Canada has a growing number of women who've revived these traditional tattoo practices and patterns. So I want to go back to this picture real quick. It's kind of hard to see the chin tattoos. You know, you can see the 311 right there, the 111, but really, really faint. So there's this great project that Michael Bradley has done, which helps explain some of the reasons we aren't totally able to see tattoos in older images. And it has to do with wet plate collodion photography. And don't ask me too many questions about this because I'm definitely not good at my chemistry, but it has to do something with the green and blue shades of the tattoos that are less likely to appear with a certain mix of chemicals that are used to develop the negative during this process. So Michael Bradley took a look at this process with Maori people. And so you can see a few examples here. It's just shocking to me how clearly those tattoos are shown in, you know, the color digital photograph versus the original wet plate collodion process. So it really makes me wonder, you know, how many photographs we see, these old photographs where someone has tattoos and we just can't tell, especially when it comes to folks with darker skin. It really washes out the tattoos in this process. So I'm wondering if that's one reason we just have so much more evidence of white people with tattoos in the 1800s and early 1900s. And you'll kind of see that reflected in my talk as well. I just haven't been able to find much documentation of non-white folks' tattoos at that point. And I wonder if this is one reason why. But if we move on to our next person, this is Olive Oatman. And you can see she is a white-skinned person, but very clear tattoos. So Olive Oatman is the first known tattooed white woman in the United States. She was part of a Mormon sect called the Brewsterites, and she moved from Illinois to this place called Bashan in Arizona, which was set to be, you know, a utopia for the Brewsterites. However, on the way, she and her family, which was her mom, her dad, her, and 9 other siblings, they disagreed with the leaders of the sect. So their family split off and headed towards California. On the way there, though, Olive, who was 14 at the time, and her family were attacked by a Yavapai tribe. Her mom and her dad and 7 of her siblings were killed. Her brother was left for dead, but later survived. And one of her sisters was taken with her with the Yavapai. She wasn't treated very well by this tribe, and she was eventually sold or traded to Mojave people. And that's where she got her tattoos. She and her sister, Marianne, were tattooed on their arms, although we don't have any photos of that, and her face. And you can see the nice broad lines here. And she's apparently the first white woman to have received these tattoos. And here's where it gets a little bit tricky. Olive loved her Mojave family. By all accounts, the Mojave people treated her very well. She assimilated. She may have married a Mojave man and had children. It's unclear. And we think now, looking back, that she sat for that tattoo on purpose. A tribal elder, Llewellyn Barrickman, has talked about this, and he believed that Olive, like most Mojave females, chose to be tattooed because the tribe never forced tattoos on anybody. Some Mojaves resisted chin tattoos until they got older, and then they were either persuaded or chose to get them for fear that they would be held back in the afterlife without them. And so when you look at Olive and you look how straight these lines are, it doesn't look like she was being held down to get this tattoo. It's really hard if you're hand poking ink into a chin, to get straight lines like that if it's against somebody's will. However, after a certain period of time where Olive and Marianne were both in this Mojave family, this Mojave tribe, soldiers found her and literally dragged her back to white society. She did not want to leave. She did not want to go back, but she was forced to return with them. And from there, because she was a tattooed woman and she was an anomaly and an oddity, she started touring. She became a public figure, kind of a celebrity. A pastor wrote a book about her and said that her tattoos were forced on her. But she never really seemed comfortable back in white society. And she actually had depression and a lot of issues after returning. So it's interesting to me that the first white woman who had these tattoos here. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. I'll let you come to your own conclusions about what you think about her story. After that, society women kind of take over the scene in America. In 1897, the New York World posted this shocking fact that 75% of American society women had tattoos. I really don't believe that's the case at all, but the fact that they could publish that number to me indicates that a pretty decent amount of women had them. And a lot of these American society women took their cues from their counterparts across the Atlantic. In Europe, the list of royalty who had tattoos is actually pretty extensive, starting in the 1880s and the 1890s. And a lot of them were Asian inspired or were done in Asia when folks traveled, and they featured really elaborate designs. Even Lady Randolph, who you can see here at right, was rumored to have a snake design on her wrist. That's Winston Churchill's mom. And apparently it was one of those where the snake is eating its own tail, but she covered it with big chunky bracelets when she was out in public, and there are no actual photos of it. But that kind of gives us a clue as to why we don't know too much about all of the women who had these tattoos. I mean, you can see this dress at left. There's a high neck, long sleeves, long hem. I mean, you could be totally tattooed and nobody would know, right? But there was one society woman who loved to show off her tattoos, and she was not the norm, but I think she is fascinating. Amy Crocker, or if we want to share her full name, Princess Aimee Isabella Crocker Ash Gilagorod Miskanov Galatzine, because she was married 5 times, including to 2 Russian princes. Amy Crocker was the heiress to the Crocker Railroad Empire. So if you know the Crocker Art Museum up in Sacramento, that's that family. She was born in Sacramento, and in 1875, when she was about 10 years old, she inherited a fortune of $10 million. In today's dollars, that's $200 million. So she pretty much could do whatever she wanted. She didn't have to worry about anything. Like I noted, she had 5 husbands. Those Russian princes at the end of her life were each 20 years younger than her, and she had 5 children. And she spent about 10 years traveling through Asia, where she got most of her tattoos. So you can see in this photo, it's very rare to have a society woman photographed with her tattoo visible, but Amy loved it. She loved the attention. That there's some snakes on her forearm here. She also had a snake on her leg as a symbol of health. She had a butterfly on her back as a symbol of the soul, apparently poised as if ready for flight. She threw lavish parties. She was at every first night production on Broadway. She was a world traveler. I mean, real wild, really amazing woman. The title of her autobiography sums it up. and I do it again. So if you want to learn more about her, you can read her autobiography. After society women, though, kind of had their fun with tattoos, it really went to working class women who continued this tradition. And a lot of that was done through tattooed ladies who worked in circus sideshows. So I'm not going to get too much into sideshows here. Obviously, they're pretty problematic. But you can see here that there are some huge, large-scale banners advertising the different kinds of people that you would see in these circus sideshows. Some of the folks who participated in sideshows were kind of self-made, like tattooed ladies who chose to get tattooed, and others were folks who had different abilities, different, they used a lot of inaccurate and not good terms back then, so I'm trying not to use the same ones. But the important thing here is that tattooed ladies were a major part of every sideshow and brought in a lot of people and a lot of money, especially because when they performed, they were showing off their full bodies at a time when that was very rare to see. So you can see here kind of the size of one of those circus sideshow banners again. And I want to point out where it says alive. They purposely put that little alive button onto the banner so that folks would know that they were seeing people who were alive, literally alive, not stuffed and dead and put on display, which I always found fascinating. But why would women join these sideshows? Why would they want to be gawked at? I mean, basically, they joined because they wanted to see the world, they wanted to travel, they wanted to be independent, they wanted to make money. Those weren't very exciting stories for people to hear, so they made up their own versions, which I'll talk about in a second. But tattooed ladies could make a pretty decent wage, and they could support themselves. And this is one of the few ways that they could do so in the 1880s, 1890s. In the 1890s, working class families lived on $300 to $500 a year. That's $300 to $500 a year. Whereas a tattooed lady, a popular one, could make $100 to $200 in a week. Of course, the circus season didn't last all year long, but that's a pretty compelling reason to get tattooed and join up with a sideshow. You're gonna be making wages that will pay for what you need. So what we see with tattooed ladies is that there are kind of two eras of tattooed ladies. The first and earliest you can see here, left with Nora Hildebrandt and right with Irene Woodward. They're kind of starting to work in the 1880s and the 1890s. And then there's another era that really begins in the 1910s to 1930s. And the narratives and the stories they told for why they got tattooed during these different eras, to me, are pretty wild. So we already know the real reason, right? Living independently, traveling, supporting yourself, making money, finding adventure. So just remember that as I kind of share some stories about why these ladies said that they got tattooed. These stories would make it into advertisements, they'd make it into newspapers. The sideshow barker would be yelling out these stories to try and attract people to buy tickets to come to the sideshow. So they had to be as scandalous as possible. And they also really had to play on what Americans at the time were interested in. So this first era, the 1880s to 1890s, 1900s, a lot of these tattooed ladies shared captivity narratives. So it was really about the American West, or the closing of the American West, and how these white women interplayed with Native American men. So let me tell you a few of these stories. And as a side note, this is not exactly. You can see I have a different background now. So you can see my very messy apartment, which I was hoping that folks would not get to see. But
we're so glad to have you back. Everyone's been thinking of their good questions and while we wait. So it was a good suspenseful moment. So thanks for joining us again.
Yes, thank you so much, everybody. So let me get back to sharing my screen here. You know, it's really not
virtual talk unless there's a technical glitch, right? Okay, so where did I lose folks? I guess is the good question. I think I should just kind of jump right into these stories, right? Okay, I'm seeing some heads nodding. Awesome. So Nora Hildebrand on the left was one of the first tattooed ladies. Nora and Irene kind of share the same sort of original tattooed lady status. They, you know, it's not really sure who is actually the first one, but they both kind of claim to be. So again, thinking of these Victorian illusions, you know, about what tattooing means and how it equates with sex. Here's the stories they told to try and draw people in. Nora Hildebrand was tattooed by her father under the threat of death of Sitting Bull. Martin, her father, and Nora were captured by Sitting Bull, and Martin was told to tattoo members of Sitting Bull's tribe. When a warrior accused Martin of poisoning him, Sitting Bull said he would give them liberty only if Martin tattooed his daughter Nora from her toes to her head. She was tied to a tree where Martin began to work for 6 hours a day for a whole year until they were rescued. That's the story that was publicized. In reality, Martin Hildebrand was one of the first tattooers in America, and he was Nora's husband, and they lived in New York City together. And they had never even been past like the Mississippi River or something crazy like that. So it's just amazing how blatantly folks just kind of made up these stories to sell tickets. With Irene, who's on the right, the story goes that she was tattooed by her father to prevent her from being kidnapped growing up in the American West. A quote from the story that she usually publicized was, quote, "In spite of the pain, the girl was delighted and coaxed her father to continue." And of course, that's not a good enough story. So when she was captured by Native people, her tattoos frightened them and she was let go. So those are the kinds of stories, you know, of course, none of it true, but that we're told to kind of captivate the American audience and try and get them into the sideshow. Then the next era, it's amazing how much it changes. All of the tattooed ladies here kind of shared stories about love and gaining independence. So we're seeing this in the 1910s, 1920s, 1930s. All of a sudden, the American public wants to hear those kinds of stories. So for example, Jean Carroll told the story that she was a bearded lady whose boyfriend couldn't bear to kiss her. So instead she shaved off her beard and got tattooed so she could continue to travel with him. Miss Victoria, another tattooed lady, got tattooed to impress a lover, but then later regretted it and started to hate him. And then Artoria here, Artoria Gibbons, told the story that she ran away with a carnival tattoo artist to be his muse at age 14. In reality, Artoria's husband was Red Gibbons, who was a tattoo artist, but she only got tattooed by him when they hit hard times so that they could work and travel together and make a steady income with their daughter at their side. And one thing I want to point out before I share a few more stories is what Artoria is wearing here. Not all of the tattooed ladies, but a lot of the tattooed ladies chose sideshow costumes to kind of reflect femininity and beauty, and to kind of show in what they were wearing, even though they were standing on a stage kind of half naked, you know, that they were still women and that they still could be feminine and beautiful with their tattoos. Lady Viola here is one of my favorite tattooed ladies. She apparently made a pact with her father. She would train to be a nurse, and then if she still wanted to get tattooed, she could. Her dad would pay for them after she completed her training. Of course, just like Artoria, Lady Viola got tattooed because it was a way to make a living, and it was a way to make a relatively good living and for her to have some freedom. Lady Viola traveled under the moniker the most beautiful tattooed woman in the world. Her real name was Ethel Martin. She lived and tattooed in Fresno for many years. She had 9 children, and she even came out of retirement at age 73 to perform in more circus sideshows. She claimed to be the oldest tattooed lady to ever perform. And a word about kind of the money it cost to get tattooed. In 1930, it would have cost Lady Viola about $485, for all of her tattoos, her full body. So if any of the folks here on this call have been tattooed, you know that what is today $7,000 for a full body tattoo is so low. For the folks who are on this call who have not had tattoos, this right arm probably cost about $1,500 between all the tattoos and the hours. So it's amazing how the pricing has changed there. That's neither here nor there. What is important is that these women got to choose their tattoo designs. So if you take a look at Lady Viola here, you can see she has a lot of patriotic designs. She has 6 presidents tattooed on her chest. She has American flags. She has the US Capitol building on her back, as well as some other imagery like the Statue of Liberty you can kind of see on her back thigh here. And then Artoria, to go back to the last slide, was actually a very deeply religious woman in her personal life. And so you can see she has some patriotic imagery on her chest, but she also has the Last Supper on her back. If you look at her, her legs here, you can see that there's religious imagery here as well. So I just think it's really important to point out that these women not only chose to get tattooed, but they chose all the images, you know, that they had. They had agency at a time when it wasn't always common for that to happen. And then one more tattooed lady that I want to share is Betty Broadbent, who I also love, and also Lyle Tuttle really loved. Betty Broadbent started working for the Ringling Brothers in 1927. She had about 350 tattoos. Those sources vary on that, and I don't know how you could even count and decide what's an individual tattoo anyway. And she worked on the Circus Sideshows circuit through the 1960s. What you see here on the right-hand image is actually Betty at the New York World's Fair in 1939, and she competed in a beauty contest there. So she did not win the beauty pageant, but I just think it's so neat that she purposely competed to show that women with tattoos and women with that many tattoos were also beautiful. She's apparently the most photographed tattooed woman in the 20th century. That's anecdotal. I'm not sure if that's actually right, but I think you'll see a lot of images of Betty Broadbent on postcards, on posters. You know, once you know her face, she starts to kind of pop up everywhere. She also worked, like a lot of these women did in the off season, as a tattooist. She worked in San Francisco for many years before retiring to Florida. You can see just a few more images of her here, including, you know, some of this very dainty feminine clothing that she wore. And of course, here is Betty's tattoo kit. So originally all tattoos were done by hand. First, you would dip a single needle or a bone, sharpened bone, or a thorn or another stylus into pigments. Then you would kind of poke the stylus into the skin, forcing the ink in. So sometimes that's called stick and poke, sometimes it's called hand tattooing, but that's still used around the world today. What you can see here is a really early version of tattoo machines, which is what most tattoo artists in the US use today. It was patented in 1891, and it can punch from 1 to 32 needles through the skin at once, and then it forces the tattoo ink in through that. So the ink typically back then was made of metal salts like zinc or cobalt or iron, but it took some time for colors to really be developed and to be safe. So a lot of the early tattoo designs that you see kind of use like this really heavy black ink, as well as dark red and navy blue, which were the most popular and readily available colors. And you can see that here with this colorized version of Maud Wagner. Of course, this image is actually in black and white, but a Reddit user colorized this, and I think he actually did a really great job because you can see the ink colors that he gave to Maud are really, you know, that navy blue and that dark red, and that's probably what she would have looked like during this time. So Maud Stevens Wagner, who you see here, is the first non-native American woman that we know who tattooed. She also, like many of these ladies, worked in the circus. She was an aerialist and a contortionist, and she met her husband Gus at the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair. He asked her on a date, And she said she would only go on a date with him if he tattooed her and then taught her to tattoo. Who knows the reason why she said that? But I do know that she had just seen Gus, her husband, tattoo 1,900 people at the World's Fair, including 31 society women, according to the St. Louis Dispatch. And so perhaps she saw that this was a gig that could make some money. What's interesting about this as well is that this really reflects the way that a lot of early female tattoo artists, or tattooists, which I say here, tattoo artists didn't come into parlance for a little bit more time, was that their husbands and boyfriends had to teach them how to tattoo. Male tattooists really jealously guarded their trade from other guys and from women. And so a lot of these women who did enter the trade only could do so through their boyfriends or husbands who taught them. So here's another picture and another reminder of how easily you could cover up all of your tattoos with the clothing of the time. And this is Maud with her husband, Gus, and her daughter, Lodiva. They all were tattoo artists. Lodiva even started tattooing at the age of 9. You can see some of her art in the online exhibits through La Quinta. And her last tattoo was actually on Ed Hardy. However, she never had any tattoos herself, which is pretty rare. We have a few more female tattoo artists to share. So Madame Austin is on the left, and we don't really know too much about her. I do know that this photo was part of Lyle Tuttle's collection, and he said it had never been seen by anybody before this exhibit. So I always just like to share this because, you know, if anybody has any information about Madame Austin who worked in San Francisco, please tell me. I would love to know. And then we also have Ruth Whalen on the left. Ruth Whalen also worked in San Francisco in the 1930s. You're going to hear San Francisco a lot over the next couple of slides, along with San Diego and LA, because port towns was where people got tattooed. Lots of sailors, lots of other folks living along the docks, but tattoo artists tended to be in these port cities when they were working. Ruth Whalen's photo is very heavily doctored. No one really knows why, so she didn't actually have all of those tattoos. So just keep that in mind as you look at her. I'm not sure how many tattoos she did have. If any, I'm sure she did have some. But she really did love tattooing sailors, and she also tattooed a lot of lesbian women and a lot of overtly lesbian imagery. So there are a few photos of that in the online exhibit as well. We also have Irene, Bobby Livery. She probably worked with Madame Austin. We think that she even took that photo on the left of Madame Austin because her husband, Andy Livery, worked in that same studio. This is a photo of her by Imogen Cunningham, who's a pretty well-known photographer. And I always think of this photo when folks ask me like, well, what are your tattoos gonna look like when you get old? And I always answer, well, I'm gonna have saggy skin anyway, so who cares if there's some color on them? You know, why not? But Imogen was one of, or not Imogen, excuse me, Bobby was another female tattoo artist who started out really early. She worked on the Circus Sideshow, and then she tattooed in the off season. She was even quoted in 1971 in a magazine article as saying that she got tattooed and became a tattoo lady because, quote, I knew a living when I saw one. So that kind of, again, goes back to what we were talking about before about why these ladies joined the sideshow circuit. We also have Painless Neal, who worked in San Diego with her sister Painful Joe and her husband. She owned 5 shops along with her sister and her husband in San Diego and basically monopolized the whole San Diego tattoo scene. Apparently she wasn't actually painless. She was not a very, she was not a tattooer with a gentle touch, we'll say. But it's pretty amazing that this woman owned and operated so many shops during and after World War II at a time when this industry was still pretty much run entirely by men. Other women that we know who were tattooed ladies, but who also tattooed on the side, Betty Broadbent, you know, we saw her tattoo kit, Lady Viola, Artoria, and even Dainty Dottie. She did not work as a tattooed lady in the circus, but she did work as a fat lady in the circus where she met her husband. So that kind of brings us up to the changing thoughts and times about tattoos. In the 1950s, there was a real decline in how many women got tattooed. It seemed like there may have been an upswing in the number of kind of gangs and criminals that kind of claimed tattoos as their own. And so even when women had hidden tattoos before, they even felt more out of favor because different parts of society were getting these tattoos and claiming that instead. However, that started to change again in the late 60s and 70s with the second wave of feminism. You know, women were reclaiming their bodies, putting art on it, you know, choosing to get tattooed and display themselves the way they wanted to. Celebrities like Janis Joplin, who got tattooed, also inspired other women to get tattooed again. You can see Janis has a little bracelet kind of tattoo. It's only on the front of the wrist and then a little heart near her breast. But if you move on all the way to today, different people definitely still have different opinions about women having tattoos, but more women than men actually have tattoos on the whole in the US today. Over a third of Americans between the ages of 18 and 40 have tattoos, and I'd have to think out here in California, the percentage has to be a whole lot higher. So at this point, I would love to say thank you for listening to me. Thank you for putting up with that glitch with the internet in the middle. And I would love to just chat, hear from folks about your tattoo story. If you have any questions, I'm here.
Amy, thank you so much. That was amazing, so interesting. Let me quickly make an announcement of our next lecture, and then we'll start chatting about tattoos and tattoo stories. So April, let's see, I'm going to share a screen here. Our next lecture in April will be Women Behaving Badly for Good with Dr. Priscilla Porter. She highlights several desert women who were tenacious as well out here in the desert and who made life for us great out here in the desert. So that will be April 15th at 1 p.m. You can go register. I've got the URL right here and we will put that in the chat for you. This one will be hosted by the Coachella Valley History Museum in conjunction with us, the La Quinta Museum. So please register for that and join us for that. And Amy, we'll go back to you. I know that we had some questions in the chat.
Yes, which I cannot see since I got booted off, but I do have one question that I see that I think might be a good one to start with, which is why and when I first got tattooed. So my first tattoo is really small. It's going to be really washed out with the lighting where I'm sitting right now, but it's a Leonard Cohen drawing about this big. I've only been tattooed by women on purpose. But this woman, when I went to the tattoo parlor to get this image, looked at me, looked at the image, and she said, you know, it'll be on you forever, right? And I was like, thanks for the vote of confidence, but yes, I'm ready. So I was a senior in college when I got that first tattoo. And I don't really have like an amazing story about why. All of my tattoos, I've just kind of felt when they were ready to be there. Like I would kind of think through an idea, luckily worked with some great tattoo artists to actually come up with a design because I'm not artistic at all. But I knew it was time to get it for me personally when I would look down and I was surprised it wasn't there. So that's actually how it started, even with this first tiny little design on the inside of my arm. I looked down and I was surprised to not see it. So I was like, okay, gotta go do it.
I love it. So let's see, Dorothy asked, is Lyle Tuttle still working?
Lyle Tuttle passed away a few years ago, unfortunately. When I met him, he was still working, but only doing very simple designs. His hands were a little bit shaky at that point. But he had tattooed people on all 7 continents, which I'm not sure if anybody else has done. So that's a fun fact about Lyle.
Amazing. We've got from Rebecca. Well, she has a comment. She says she's thinking of Groucho's number Day at the Circus, Lydia the Tattooed Lady. So thank you, Rebecca. David is asking, Anyone familiar with Jennifer Putzi's dissertation on 19th century American women tattooing? Does that ring any bells for you, Amy?
No, you know what? I would have to look into that.
And David, if you're here and you want to unmute and give us any comment on that, you're welcome to do that. Or if anyone else has a comment.
Yeah, no, I'm here. So she did her PhD dissertation, I think, at University of Illinois. And the only reason I know this, she also included in her dissertation Olive Oatman and the chin tattooing. And actually, her brother is an archaeologist who I worked with. I'm an archaeologist with the National Park Service, and I work with the Mojave tribe. So all of this is really amazing and fascinating and cool for me. So thanks.
Thank you
Thanks,
for
David.
that recommendation. I'll have to look into that.
I was just a question. You talked about the captivity stories of some of the early tattooed women. Was that related to Olive Oatman's story and fame, or just part of the era?
I think it was part of the era. They may have known that Olive Oatman was a speaker who toured the country and was paid to do speaking engagements, that she had a book. Well, the men in her life published a book about her, but it was a bestseller at the time. I'm not sure if they drew inspiration from Olive or if it was just indicative of the fact that American society at that time was just so interested in anything about the American West.
Right, interesting. Let's see. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I do have some questions that were direct message to me as well.
Oh, great.
So let me know if you want to ask one or if I should answer some of those.
Let me ask this one, then we'll head over to yours. What type of pigment did the early Native Americans use? From Dorothy.
Dorothy, that's a great question. I should know the answer to this. I used to know the answer to this. But I mean, it was all natural materials. It was plant stuff that was kind of ground up, I believe. Gosh, I'm sorry. I should know the answer to that. But I would need to look it up again to give you the correct answer. I'm sorry, Dorothy. I do have some other questions coming through over here. Stephanie asked, how did women get their tattoos? Did they have access to the same tattoo parlors as men? And for the most part, yes, women could go in there. A lot of the ladies who got tattooed to be tattooed ladies in the Circus Sideshow didn't have to go to a special tattoo shop or find a traveling tattoo artist because they were already traveling with one. A lot of these Circus Sideshows had tattoo artists who set up shop along with the sideshow. It was an extra way to make some revenue, and people would see the tattooed lady or tattooed men. There were tattooed men on the circuit. They just didn't make as much money for the sideshow owners, so they fell out of favor. But basically the whole point was you see this tattooed person and then you want to remember your experience and you go and get a tattoo yourself. So I would imagine that a lot of these ladies, especially the tattooed ladies, would just kind of get tattooed on the off season by them or after hours. I also have a question here. Are most women open to sharing their tattoo story? I'm always curious and admire the beautiful ink work. Is it polite to ask? That is a great question, and it really just depends on the person. I've had strangers come up to me and grab my arm and say, "What's this about?" And that's just like, stay away from me. I don't want to talk to you. Like, this is creepy. But in the course of a normal conversation, if you're getting along, I think it's okay to ask for them to share why they got something. They'll tell you if they don't want to tell you. The other thing is, just respect personal boundaries. If you tell someone, "Oh, I love your tattoo, it's beautiful." Great. I think it's the same as anything else. If you would tell someone that you like their shirt, it's okay. It's all about the intent that you have coming from you to ask. But again, just judge the situation. Not everyone wants to talk about it. Not everyone wants to have a conversation. Some people will be open to it. Some people won't. And so, yeah, that's where I would leave it, I think.
got one here from Lorraine. Can you talk about the evolution of types of designs over the 20th and 21st century?
You know, it's kind of amazing to me that a lot of the tattoo designs that women got in the early 1900s and moving forward, I mean, we're still seeing the same kinds of designs nowadays. I mean, you can see I have some, well, I have a lot of flowers. I have way too many flowers, I think, on my arms. But flowers were also popular then. Women were getting butterflies. They were getting cars. They were getting portraits of lovers. They were getting family crests. You know, we don't have a ton of photographic evidence of like the society women who were getting that done. But I think that, you know, women were then getting representations of what they felt on the inside and the designs that they liked. And it's the same thing now. So tattoo artists today are amazing artists. You know, they can do things that tattoo artists back then or tattooists couldn't even dream about. So the styles have changed a lot. Female artists, I mean, I think that I really like my tattoos, obviously. I think that they look a little bit different than, you know, Maud Stevens Wagner had, which were really heavy, chunky lines, you know, really bold. The shading was a little bit out there. I think I'm starting to ramble. I think I'm starting to ramble too much right now. I think designs kind of continue to be the same. The styles are what's changed. And I can't speak too much to that because I'm not an art historian, just a historian.
So interesting. That wasn't rambling. That was interesting. I have a question that maybe and Amy, maybe you have some contacts in the area down here, but maybe some others do as well. Any recommendations on women artists here in the desert? I'm ready, says Nancy. Yay, Nancy.
I love that. I would love to open the floor up. I don't know too many tattoo artists in the desert. Like I said, I know before World War II more. You know, I need help learning more about women who are tattooing now who are doing amazing work.
Well, if anyone here has a recommendation for Nancy, you can go ahead and unmute or put it in the chat, but I'd be interested to know as well. I believe we've had some responses to our Instagrams from some women. Oh, here, Darlene says, oh, we've got a few. Jay at Strata in Yucca Valley, Ink and Steel in Joshua Tree. Nancy, we've got some suggestions in the chat for you. This is exciting. Interesting, great. Oh, there's Aiden Koch in Landers. We've got some exciting possibilities here for Nancy. And follow-up recommendations for excellent. Good things about the woman who owns Strata. Thanks for that question, Nancy. All right, do you have any more questions on your end there, Amy?
No, I think I've covered all the ones that were sent directly to me.
Awesome. Well, this has been such a neat talk. I'm glad that you were able to join us, that everyone was able to join us. Again, we hope if you haven't had the chance, please check out Amy's exhibit that is online through the La Quinta Museum right now. We put that in the chat, and also please join us next month as well. I'm going to put the link to register for next month's lecture, which is on women behaving badly for good. So that one will be interesting too. It's been great to be here with all of you. We so appreciate this program where we can collaborate with these other museums and bring you this great and interesting content. And I'm just so glad that I get to be here for all of it. So thank you, Amy. Thanks for everyone for joining us. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone for being here. I really appreciate it.